your host, Harry Wilkinson. Hello, welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. My name is Harry Wilkinson, and this is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks events, happenings in the world, happenings in technology, in the environment, in anything that affects us and that we hear about throughout our week, whether we be exposed to social media, some of the new media that we interact with, such as our tablets and cell phones, or even the 24-hour news channels, or just the old-fashioned newspaper or radio in the car. We seem more and more to be bombarded with information, and a lot of times it's information that is maybe not essential information or really helpful information, but information all the same. And some of it is button pushing-y, the kind of information that's meant to provoke a reaction or provoke interest or provoke some kind of response, or maybe just to get attention. And as I've spoken of before on this show, this is because the media and the gatekeepers of the information that the media does present are businesses that they rely on good ratings so that they can charge higher prices for advertising, and getting ratings means getting people to pay attention to you. So quite often news is structured around getting that result, getting people's attention, getting the ratings, rather than actually providing helpful information or useful information. But sometimes, quite often there is a lot of useful and important information. So what we do is we take a step back from all of that. And as I believe the quote in the Bible goes, they may not have meant it for good, but it can be used for good. Something along those lines. That's how I look at these stories, that sometimes they might provoke a feeling of frustration or anger or even helplessness. And for many spiritual type people, they say they just rather tune out, disconnect, which you can do for a while, and I think it's really important to actually have a sort of media break, at least once a week. But the fact of the matter is that unless you find a way to live on a mountaintop, you're going to be interacting with these kinds of things, and they actually are gifts, though they might not feel that way. The reason I say that they're gifts is that you can go into those feelings that they evoke, that they provoke, and you can take a look at the situation from the metaphysical perspective, with the knowledge that these are manufactured illusions that ourselves are behind at the highest level of ourselves. They're like virtual reality scenarios in which we play a part, and we have certain rules, conditions, and so forth in which we interact with this. And through that, we get to experience certain feelings, emotions, thoughts. But we also have an understanding that those are not the truth of who and what we are. And when we recognize that this is an amazingly created illusion, that you yourself, the big you, have concocted along with all of the other big U's that make up the what I call divine mind, or the higher intelligence, you can begin to get energized from that. You can take energy back from that which has been created by acknowledging the truth of it, the truth of its illusory quality. And then that, in turn, energizes you, and you begin to feel, well, not only more in control, but I've even felt a sort of amazement at and wonder at all of it, and how incredibly bizarre and unusual this creation is. And by facing it, those feelings of distrust or fear or anger or upset, they begin to dissipate. And then you can begin to understand that you are the one in control here. It's a way of really understanding that many of these things that we create, well, it's a way of just putting them in perspective. Let's just say that. And so on this show, we talk about, we in the beginning, early portions of the show, we'll talk about topics in the news. For instance, today we're going to be talking a little bit about upcoming elections and the continuing conversation we seem to be having about truth or lack thereof. And it's a topic we've come to a couple of times already, but it's time to talk about it again. So, of course, our opening segment is usually something to do with current events. Then we will go into doing some wellness tips, and we are bringing back two old segments on our show. One is the Pioneers of Consciousness. I did this quite a few years back when we were talking about scientists that are not particularly well known or unsung, if you will, who have developed new perspectives that help science begin to think about consciousness, which is something science has been uncomfortable with, and the scientific tools that are used for many, important research discoveries are not effective in exploring certain areas of consciousness. And rather than be curious about that and to change one's approach, they are often dismissed. That's a big theme that has always been part of this show. So the Pioneers of Consciousness are those people who have added to exploring this new frontier. And there are several new ones that have come to my attention, most through this book written by Michael Pollan that I've been talking about quite a bit, about changing your mind. A lot of it has to do with new experiments that are being done, clinical experiments, clinical trials in clinical settings using psychedelic chemicals to not only help people with things like PTSD and also those dealing with anxiety, but also for well people to help them engage more spiritually. So there's quite a few new names to talk about, so that's why I'm bringing that back. And I also mentioned that I will be bringing back the guided meditation segment as well. We'll end our episodes with guided meditations that can help you if you're trying to build a meditation practice of your own. So those two segments are coming back as of today, and hopefully that will be of good help to you. Right now, we're going to talk about, as I mentioned, the political aspects of the news that have come into discussion lately, mainly in relation to the midterm elections that are coming up, and who is going to vote for whom, and so forth and so on. One of the things that's being discussed a lot on most of the news programs that you'll tune into is the idea of this polarization that's happening, that voters, people in our country of the United States here, are living sort of in their own bubbles, so that conservatives are voting one way and progressives or Democrats are voting the other way, and that these two factions, if you will, see the world in completely different ways, and are their representatives in Congress are also at odds with one another, because the differences seem to be so vast. So voter turnout is likely to be bigger, according to this latest article from the Washington Post, which of course, each side will feel is good news for them. And they say that enthusiasm is up across almost all demographic groups, but the increases are greatest amongst younger adults, non-white voters, and those who say they favor Democrats for the House. Well, that's an interesting statistic, and for the moment, I will, certainly open up to say, to make my claim about what much of my political leanings are, and that's good news for the kinds of things that I resonate to. However, also they are citing that there's a rise in President Trump's job approval rating, and there seems to be a Republican uptick in interest in voting, thanks to apparently the Kavanaugh hearings, in which the Judge Kavanaugh was finally sworn in after a very rancorous debate, and apparently, at least according to reports, this seems to be firing up the Republican base. So I take that step back, especially when I do this program. I've let you know what my political leanings tend to be, but then I am more and more keenly interested in taking that step back and really using the quality of discernment. And it's something that I encourage everyone to do, especially if you are of one of those two camps and you feel like you definitely know who you're going to vote to, or what you're going to vote for and what you stand for. And that's great, and that may very well be what you end up doing. But I would encourage a process of